Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture class on early childhood caries part 2. This is the second and the last part of the lecture series on early childhood caries. I am Dr. Fawaz Siddiqui from the Department of Pediatric Dentistry, and let's see what we are going to learn in today's lecture. So the intended learning outcome is that by the end of the lecture you will be able to manage a case of early childhood caries, which is quite common when you are attending your clinical posting. So it's important that you understand, learn how to apply what you learned today in clinical practice. So let's begin. Today's presentation I have outlined for you so that it is easy for you to understand. We're going to look at some basic ways of diagnosing early childhood caries, and then we're going to look at how we can manage. In the management of early childhood caries, we have two ways we can do: medical and surgical. So we're going to look at these, and then we're going to look at the prognosis of management of early childhood caries, recall and follow up, and then we'll also look at the barriers in the management of early childhood caries, so we know that how to avoid those barriers or overcome those barriers. And lastly, we will look at the summary of American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry guidelines, which is quite comprehensive when we talk about management of pediatric dentistry, management of early childhood caries. So let's begin. To do the diagnosis of early childhood caries, really you need a good set of eyes, right? So the first thing is your visual and clinical examination, and when you are doing that, make sure the teeth is clean, dry, and with a good light source. So this is essentially done so that you don't miss out on any incipient caries or early caries or white spot lesions. So we need to make sure the teeth is clean and dry to diagnose uh, white spot lesions. So we make sure that we do that. Okay, so when you are examining a patient and the patient has a lot of gross plaque and calculus or food debris, it's always best to first, clean up and then do the examination, right? So that you don't miss out on early childhood caries diagnosis, because white spot lesions, you can apply topical fluoride and reverse the demineralized part of the enamel and remineralize it back, right? So we have an opportunity there. So we need to ensure that we catch all those lesions, we diagnose all those lesions. Then probing is not advisable now, because they say if you use a very sharp probe, you may break the demineralized enamel and cause iatrogenic cavitation. So we are not going to use any probe. We are going to simply follow the IC-DAS system of caries diagnosis. So all we need is a good dry tooth examined in a good light. So once we have done that, there will be certain areas which will be very difficult for us to visualize clinically, and typical example is your contact points, and we know that contact points in primary dentition is quite broad, and you really cannot see what is under it because of the broad contact points. So it is always a good idea to take a bite-wing radiograph to aid your diagnosis of early childhood caries and detect any proximal caries. So if you want to detect proximal caries, you have to take a bite-wing radiograph, because this is a radiograph which will show the contact points really, really well, so you don't miss out on any interproximal caries. And if you see here, we have the bite-wing radiograph with nice um, visualization of the interdental areas, the proximal part of the tooth. So we are really, really sure that there is no caries, or if there is any caries, you will see demineralization. Now, if you can identify what kind of radiograph is this, is an extraoral lateral oblique radiograph, and you can see this part of the mandible is quite visible. All right. So you can use this extraoral radiographic techniques if the child is unable to tolerate the intraoral films, maybe because of gag or maybe because the child is too young. So you can also go ahead and use an extraoral radiographic technique, which would be your lateral oblique, to view the teeth in question. And OPGs are not routinely recommended for caries diagnosis because there will be overlapping of proximal structures, proximal part of the teeth, which will make our diagnosis really difficult. But if you are going to look at the gross caries presence, OPG can be used, and with digital OPGs, you can really sharpen the images and can have a very good look at the teeth as well. So it depends on the tools that you're using and how best you can utilize those tools, radiographic tools, for diagnosis of early childhood caries. Some other aids that we use is the salivary flow rate and the salivary buffering capacity. Obviously, you need to have some additional equipments for this, and we do not do it routinely. We only depend on ICDAS and radiographic technique. But if you suspect um, salivary flow to be a problem or salivary buffering capacity to be a problem, definitely you can go in for some chairside diagnostic aids which can be used absolutely. Then the last technique is the lip technique. As you see in the picture here, all the parents need to do is just lift the lip and examine the teeth for any white spot, brown spot, black spot. So it's quite crude way of diagnosing caries, but this is one of the best methods that we can teach the parents and also the other healthcare workers to detect caries. So when the patient goes for the vaccination shots, the nurses can do this lift the lip technique and check the teeth also, and even pediatrician can do it. And later we'll see how we can use this. So these are some other diagnostic aids that we can use in the detection of early childhood caries from clinical perspective. So when we come down to the management per se of early childhood caries, like we discussed, there is a medical management and the surgical management. So here we are going to first look at the medical management and then the surgical management. So the basic aim of medical management of early childhood caries is really early identification of patients with ECC, so that we can institute the preventive measures very soon. So basically the idea is to catch all the white spot lesions before they undergo cavitation, so we can remineralize all those uh, and delay the need for a restorative option. Okay, so early identification, and next one is preventing the progression of the caries in the children who already have early childhood caries. So we need to do something to really prevent the progression or halt the progression or reverse the progression of caries. And the last one is preventing the recurrence of dental caries. So in children whom we have already treated for early childhood caries, the medical management should be done to prevent the recurrence of the early childhood caries in the patient. So how do we achieve that? So first thing, I've listed out the things that we can do, the strategies that we can follow. The first strategy is oral health promotion. Okay, so it needs no introduction that we need to create awareness and alert the parents and prospective parents, the healthcare workers on the uh, etiology of early childhood caries and what do they look like, okay, and what are the treatment options, and basically create an awareness that such a condition exists and we need to prevent it. So oral health promotion goes for everyone, all right? So be it a healthcare worker, be an obstetrics or gynecologist or pediatrician or paramedical staff, nurses, everyone in healthcare should be aware what does an early childhood caries look like and what are the etiological causes, so that we can have prevention, and if not primary prevention, secondary prevention, that means early diagnosis and care. Okay, and when you're doing health promotion, you also need to promote good dietary practices for new mothers, right? So make sure these mothers follow diet which is low in sugar and it is not cariogenic, because these pregnant mothers have these food cravings and they really like to munch on ice creams and crunchy potato chips and things like that, which will really cause increase in the streptococcus count in their mouth, and then these streptococcus can be transmitted vertically to the newborn child. So we need to have a good dietary practice guidelines for the mothers as well. And lastly, you see, prescribe sugar-free liquid medicines whenever appropriate. So these children who have some other sickness like bronchial asthma, and they need to be given salbutamol syrups, and we have to make sure that these syrups are sugar-free, so they do not contain sucrose. Basically, sucrose is added to make it palatable for the child, so the child does not make fuzz in drinking the medicine. So the pharmaceutical industries have come out with sugar substitutes like saccharin. They use instead of sucrose to make the liquid preparation sweet. So whatever happens, make sure and create an awareness among the medical fraternity that to prescribe sugar-free liquid medicines whenever appropriate for the children. The next thing that we can do is reinforce oral hygiene practices. Okay, so there is no alternative to this. So make sure the child brushes his teeth as soon as his first tooth erupts in the oral cavity, and when the child uses the toothpaste, ensure that the fluoride concentration of toothpaste is minimum 1000 parts per million. Okay, so in US we have 1000 parts per million is your adult toothpaste, and in UK you will have 1350 parts per million fluoride in the adult toothpaste. So what you must remember here is that we are going to use adult toothpaste for the children. So you ask me next question, will this 1000 parts per million be harmful to the child? So the recommendation is that child who is younger than 3 years, all you need to do is use a smear of the toothpaste. And those who are between age and 3 and 6, they should use only a pea-sized amount of toothpaste. So even if the child swallows the toothpaste, right, there's no likelihood of acute toxicity or chronic toxicity. But the important part is that the child must get 1000 parts per million fluoride containing toothpaste coming in contact with his or her tooth, so that we have an opportunity to mineralize any demineralized enamel there. Alright, so this is very very important. This is the latest recommendation. And of course, we have to collaborate with the parents and other healthcare workers to ensure that all infants and toddlers have access to dental screening, counseling, and preventive care. So we have to really work together as a network with the other healthcare providers to ensure the child gets dental screening done quite early in life, so that we can do anticipatory guidance for the parents, and we can start on appropriate oral hygiene practices. Third and the final thing that we can do is the clinical things that we can be performed. So you can put in fissure sealants for all the molars or any deep bits and fissures in the lingual bit of the anteriors. Anywhere you feel, you just go ahead and you can seal those. Then you can also use a systemic and topical fluoride application for the general population, so which will be like protect against the caries in general. So systemic with the water fluoridation is the best example, and do not give any supplement of fluoride tablets without knowing the water the level of fluoride present in the water of that community. So we really need to be careful on that. And of course, systemic fluoride is useful only when the tooth is still developing. But once the tooth has developed and has erupted, now we're looking at the primary. The topical fluoride is the best for general population. And when you are doing topical fluoride application for high caries risk, you need to apply fluoride varnish at the interval of every 3 to 4 months, just to make sure that the tooth gets enough fluoride for remineralization. Then we need to encourage early dental visits, which should be within 6 months of eruption of the first tooth. So that means the first tooth to erupt, primary tooth to erupt in the child's mouth is your lower central incisors around the age of 6 to 9 months. So within the 6 months of eruption, the parents must bring their child for dental examination, and that is the concept of your dental home. Okay, so say the tooth erupts at 6 months, so by 12 months the child must have the first dental visit. So this is what it means. Then children with special healthcare needs are a priority patients, because these are the children whose oral health gets ignored maximum, because they have other health issues and the parents are really focused on the other medical aspects of the child's health, and the oral health gets neglected. So any children with special healthcare needs are a priority patient for us, because if we can do preventive measures, we can avoid any surgical interventions later in life, which would be very difficult for the child to cope up with, and for us also, in order to perform those procedures in children with special healthcare needs. Then we have 38% silver diamine fluoride application. This is something that new has come in the last 5 to 7 years, so we must be aware of this. And the proximal stripping can be done to prevent progression of caries. Okay, so we'll have a look at these two in more detail. So let's begin with 38% silver diamine fluoride. It's also called as, in short, as SDF, and what it does is it arrests the progression of caries, and we can use this to our advantage if we need to postpone the definitive treatment for some reason. And those reasons can be the child is just too young to sit in the dental chair, and we need to at least arrest the caries so that after a year or so we can do a restoration properly. And when you are applying silver diamine fluoride, no operative intervention is required. So that means you don't do any caries removal at all. You just simply apply silver diamine fluoride for 1 minute on a tooth, dried and clean tooth, and then dry the solution with the gentle flow of compressed air, and that is done. And if you can do it twice in a year, but the only problem is, like I here showed in the picture, is this was carious lesion in a young child, and this is what happens after the application of silver diamine fluoride. This is the blackish discoloration of the carious part. So what this essentially means is that all the caries part has been arrested, but aesthetically it's not very pleasing, and this is a reason sometimes the parents do not want to go for silver diamine fluoride. In Malaysia, silver diamine fluoride is still not available, but globally it is available and used quite often, especially in US. And we have guidelines from coming in from UK, and we need to be aware of this because this is a really really handy solution for a very very young child. So the indication is children who are at high caries risk with anterior or posterior active cavitated lesions, and these cavitated carious lesions, especially if they are present in children who have got behavioral or medical management challenges, for example children with cerebral palsy or children with severe autism, and it's very difficult to get these child to calm down. So you can use silver diamine fluoride to really postpone the definitive treatment till we can do the definitive treatment for some reason. Maybe get an OT, maybe the general anesthesia cannot be given to the child and things like that. So silver diamine fluoride really proves to be handy there. Then patients with multiple cavitated carious lesions that may not all be treated in one visit. So children with severe early childhood caries where all the 20 primary teeth are carious, and you can use silver diamine fluoride to apply to arrest the caries in all the cavitated lesions so that we can start our definitive procedures quadrant wise, so there will be less chances of progression of caries and pulpal involvement. Then difficult to treat cavitated dental caries lesions. So just imagine if we have a cavitated lesion on a proximal surface, okay, on a child who cannot tolerate your handpiece, so we can go ahead and use silver diamine fluoride to at least arrest the progression of caries till we can do some definitive treatment about it. Then patients without access to or with difficulty in accessing dental care. So obviously children who are brought in by parents who cannot take leave from work frequently to bring their children for multiple visits. So here you can apply silver diamine fluoride and then you can schedule the appointment so that the definitive treatment can be done. Then lastly, we have active cavitated carious lesions with no clinical signs of pulpal involvement. Okay, obviously this goes without saying that if the caries is involving pulp, then our whole treatment procedure changes to surgical intervention, right? Where we have to handle the pulp. So in these cases, silver diamine fluoride is a definite no-no. The final thing that we can do in the clinic is interproximal stripping, and in this interproximal stripping, what you do is that you use a very thin tapered diamond burr or a carbide burr and basically open up the interproximal areas. So what this does is that because the interproximal areas are open, the food lodgement will not happen, and these interproximal areas will have contact with the saliva, with the toothbrush, with the toothpaste, and the caries will not initiate, or if the caries has initiated, it will get arrested. So in this figure, if you see, you have all these proximal caries, and then this is how you do proximal stripping, and then we can control the progression of caries. So obviously, interproximal stripping is a treatment option for young children, especially in the anterior teeth, where it's very difficult to do proximal restoration in a restless child. So the best you can do is do interproximal stripping and uh, try to arrest the caries lesion till a time that you can actually do a strip crown later on that particular tooth. So this is one of our techniques that we can use for medical management of early childhood caries. Alright, with this we come to the surgical management of early childhood caries. That means we really have to do something to the tooth in order to achieve these aims. Okay, the aims are control caries progression, stabilize caries progression, restore carious lesions, and extract non-restorable teeth. So if you see in the aims here, we are not talking about any prevention, right? Because the prevention is under the medical management. So in surgical, basically we try to control and stabilize and restore the carious part of the tooth. So let's look at these one by one. So when we say control of the carious lesion, okay, uh, uh, the important thing is that an individualized caries risk assessment has to be done as your first step. Okay, so from this assessment, you will come to know the caries risk factor for that particular child, and then you also have to aim at modifying those risk factors as well. This is important because there's no point doing restoration for carious tooth in a child where the risk factors are not controlled, because this child will come back to you again with secondary caries and recurrent caries. So it is very important that before you do any surgical intervention, you must try to modify the risk factors. That means you must put in place the medical management before you start with the surgical management. The parent should be asked to wean off the child from using a bottle while in bed. In case of considerable emotional dependence on the bottle, suggest the use of plain water. So these are some things that you need to sit with the parent and inform them before you actually start the surgical procedure. So likewise, we have the third point here is parents are instructed to brush child's teeth last thing at night with fluoridated toothpaste, and for children aged 3 to 6, JSI topical fluoride warning, that is 2.2% fluoride application to teeth, should be carried out uh, twice yearly. So if you can understand, my drift here is that before you touch the tooth with your burr, okay, you need to get all these in place. Otherwise, your treatment will keep failing, and then you will earn a very bad reputation that all your fillings fall off in 1 year or 6 months. So understand this, that control of carious lesion is the first step in the surgical management of ECC. The second is your stabilization and temporization of carious lesion. Alright, so what you do in this particular step is that you excavate all the carious part with a spoon excavator. Right, so everything that comes out with the spoon excavator, soft and leathery dentine, everything, remove it with the spoon excavator. Don't use your air rotor or burr, and just seal the tooth or the teeth with a glass ionomer cement. So if you see here, this child has got a multiple carious teeth, and in this procedure, the operator is applying the GIC available in the capsule form to close all the caries that has been excavated. So this is called as temporization. What temporization does is that it basically reduces the bacterial load in the carious cavity, and once this load comes down, the dentine has the opportunity to lay down the reparative dentine and the tertiary dentine to protect the pulp, and therefore we have arrest of caries progression, or caries progression reduces. And if you're using a glass ionomer, then we have added advantage of fluoride release in the depth of the carious lesion. And for this reason, it is advocated that sealing of partially excavated dentine caries is capable of arresting lesion progression, and complete dentine caries removal is not essential. So even if some part of caries dentine is left behind, okay, there will be arrest of the caries lesion. So it's a really important step, and especially if the child is restless and there are multiple caries teeth in the child's mouth. So what you can do is in one session just temporize the mandibular arch, next session temporize the maxillary arch, and then you look at tooth by tooth what definitive restorative treatment can be done for the tooth. Okay. So if the caries lesion is arrested, that means that the child has come and you see the caries is a saucer-shaped caries and on looks like dark and hard, and on probing you find that the lesion is hard, so mostly it is arrested caries. And for this, so you just need to monitor so that it does not get caries in the future till the tooth exfoliates. So this you can do as part of your stabilization and temporization of caries lesion. Next is your definitive restorative treatment, right? Here we have to do what is called as damage repair. Okay, so when we say restorative treatment, we are basically removing the caries part of the tooth and replacing it with a suitable dental material so that the tooth becomes caries free, the progression of caries stops, and the surface of the tooth is brought into a self cleansing area so that the plaque accumulation cannot happen, the food lodgement cannot happen, the food stagnation cannot happen. So this is your restorative option when you talk about early childhood caries. So the treatment approach should take into consideration the child's risk factors and the age, right? Again, I am stressing that if the child's risk factors are not modified, your definitive restorative treatment is going to fail. And if the child is very young, we need to look at the other factors, maybe alternative restorative materials, for example, to deal with it. So basically, the definitive treatment depends or is influenced by site and extension of caries progression. So, for example, if you have interproximal caries, right, maybe you want to go ahead and do a stainless steel crown restoration rather than try a proximal composite restoration or a GIC restoration. Then, of course, extent of caries progression. So here we have to take a decision that we want to do an indirect pulp capping or a direct pulp capping. Of course, that pulp capping is not indicated in primary teeth, but indirect pulp capping or pulpotomy, which has to be done. So your restorative plan will depend on that. Then the child's level of cooperation during the treatment. Obviously, for restorative treatment, the child has to sit calmly in the dental chair and open the mouth for the amount of time that we need to get the work done. So child's cooperation is of paramount importance. If child is really uncooperative, then we need to spend some time to do behavior management. And once the child is able to cooperate and follow your instructions, then we can go ahead and do the restorative treatment. Otherwise, the treatment is likely to fail because of isolation reason, because of difficulty in complete caries removal. Then the third one is the parents' level of compliance for the treatment. Okay, trying to understand this that your definitive restorative treatment is not the end of early childhood caries, and the child can still get recurrent caries and secondary caries. So the parents must comply with all the medical management that we discussed, especially maintaining the oral hygiene of the child. So we must look at the parents' level of compliance with the treatment. So if the parents' expectation is the restoration will be done and the child will never get caries anymore, okay, then that is a difficult situation where you need to sit with the parents and really do counseling of for early childhood caries. So patient compliance is good for the treatment, and definitely the results will be better, prognosis will be better. We also look at the longevity of the tooth. So if the tooth which is going to remain in the mouth for the traces is about 2 years or more than 1 year, 2 years, right? We need to do some definitive treatment which will last for more than 2 years, right? So things like putting a stainless steel crown is one definitive treatment which will make the tooth to be used by the child for 2 years or more. But if you have a tooth which is going to exfoliate in the next 6 months or 8 months, maybe you don't want to put a stainless steel crown on that tooth, and you can work with a regular GIC and wait for the tooth to exfoliate physiologically without any intervention. So we have to look at the longevity of the tooth. So we need to look at the root resorption, the eruption of the permanent tooth, the developmental stage of the succedaneous tooth, and things like that. Then we have general anesthesia, which may provide better conditions to perform restorative procedures. So really in pediatric dentistry, it is very easy to take all the children under general anesthesia and complete the treatment in one shot. But here also we have certain indications and contraindications, and you have to really weigh the harm and benefit risk when you're taking a child under general anesthesia, because there is a chance of mortality of children under general anesthesia. So even though we can do a good clinical work, but we have to weigh the pros and cons of general anesthesia first. General anesthesia, under certain circumstances, may offer a cost-saving alternative to sedation for children with ECC. So, like I said, you can take the child under general anesthesia and complete the whole treatment, which would require multiple visits and multiple sedation if you want to do it on your outpatient basis. So, general anesthesia can be used for those certain circumstances. So this you must have learned when you were discussing pharmacological behavior management, when we're discussing general anesthesia indications and contraindications. Okay. With this, I want to bring you up to a technique which is called as Hall's technique. Okay, and this technique was used in Scotland the first, and how it happened was that the primary dental healthcare dentist there was overwhelmed with children with a lot of caries teeth, and it was not possible to put all those children under general anesthesia for treatment. So what the dentist did was they simply put a stainless steel crown on the tooth without any local anesthesia, without any caries removal, without any tooth preparation. And later it was found that all those tooth on which the dentist had provided the stainless steel crown using without using any anesthesia and caries removal and tooth preparation, all of them had a very good prognosis, and therefore this treatment came into being and called as Hall technique. So if you see here in the picture here, this tooth has got a very big carious lesion, alright, and this one has got a smaller carious lesion, and this is radiograph, so it's quite big, approaching the pulp. So what we can do is just put a stainless steel crown, and this is how it will appear. So we can use the GIC which is there in the stainless steel crown to fill up this as well. So this concept is very similar to the temporization that we discussed little earlier. Okay, so what happens is the nutrient supply for the bacteria is stopped. There's no more food stagnation because now it is filled with restorative material. So the bacteria really cannot metabolize and produce the lactic acid and the pyruvic acid. So progression of caries stops. Along with this, you have fluoride in the glass ionomer cement, which will try to remineralize any demineralized level. And essentially, once the bacteria is not able to produce acid, the dentine will have an opportunity to produce, the pulp will have an opportunity to produce tertiary dentine and reparative dentine, and you will see these tooth survive for their natural life and they exfoliate when the time comes. And here on the smaller one, you can see a nice GIC restoration done. Okay, so this is a Hall technique which we can use in the clinic for children with who are difficult to manage because they are too young or they are very restless or there is a medical problem. So if you see here, we have a small carious lesion, okay, and then we apply our silver diamine, 38% silver diamine fluoride into the carious lesion, all right, and it all turns black. That means the silver diamide has worked, and then we can apply fluoride varnish and restore it with GIC, okay, or we can skip the fluoride varnish also. After this, you can directly apply GIC, and the tooth is restored and done. So obviously the caries will not progress, and there will be uh, purple involvement will not be there. So this is called as silver modified atraumatic restorative technique, and this technique you have to use smartly because don't try it for each and every case. Wherever you have an indication the child is difficult, cannot open the mouth for a very long time, so you can go ahead and use this technique. So you must know about this technique in the current clinical practice of pediatric dentistry. Lastly, we come to all those teeth. As you see in the photograph here, all those teeth which are really cannot be saved. Okay, we have a small abscess opening here. So these are the anteriors, total crown loss, grossly caries cannot be saved, and they have to go for either extraction or for endodontic treatment. So we really have to take a call on what would work best for the child. It is all important to avoid dental extraction during the child's first visit so that the child does not have any traumatic experience right in the first visit. Otherwise, they will not come to you in the second visit, or you will have behavioral problems in the second visit. The decision to extract any tooth should be made only after considering both the general and local factors, which means the child's general health and, of course, the child's caries risk assessment to decide what needs to be done. Treatment on a general anesthesia, if you are doing, you must keep in mind that if the child is unable to be compliant during your dental treatment in chair, or if the child requires extensive treatment, that means multiple extractions, multiple pulpotomies, multiple local anesthetic injections, then the use of general anesthesia may be considered. Otherwise, you really have to uh, do the treatment chair side. Outcome of treatments related to quality of restorations performed on a GA are better than sedation, obviously, because the environment under which you do the restorative work is really controlled, the child is not moving, the isolation is really good, and the treatment outcomes are very nice. The oral rehabilitation coupled with regular application of 10% povidone iodine application can be a good alternative to control dental caries in children affected with early childhood caries. So this is taken out of literature where they have recommended even regular application of 10% povidone iodine as an alternative to control dental caries. That means, alternative to fluoride. Povidone iodine, as you know, it's a heavy metal which can have bacteriostatic effect on the plaque bacteria. So these are some of the recommendations that are there. To summarize the surgical management of ECC, the general factors and local factors. General factors, we look at the patient's cooperation, the medical condition of the patient, and the dental infection. Okay, so dental infection may increase the patient's morbidity or mortality. Then we need to really, take into consideration what is best for the child. Then the local factors, we need to look at the restorability of the crown. If the crown is unrestorable, better go for extraction. The crown is restorable only then you attempt any kind of restorative treatment or pulp therapy followed by restorative treatment. Extent of caries which may involve pulp and the roots are really not amenable to surgical restoration and they have to go for extraction. Potential for malocclusion of disturbances in development of dentition, balancing and compensating extractions may be considered. So if you're looking at the development of malocclusion in the future and how you can reduce the severity of those malocclusions by selectively extracting those grossly carious primary molars or the anteriors, you can consider those also in your surgical management. So no need for doing restoration, you can just go for extraction, especially if the tooth is extensively carious. So these are some general factors and local factors you must consider when you are about to perform surgical management. So prognosis, what happens to the child on whom we have provided medical management and surgical management? The literature says even aggressive dental surgery for early childhood caries does not always result in acceptable clinical outcomes as there is still risk of relapse. So mostly what happens is that once all the teeth has been restored, there is laxity from the parents on oral hygiene. When see the child is already having nice set of teeth, so they become relaxed and then the oral hygiene may suffer. So we really aggressive dental surgery for ECC is prone to relapse. New caries lesion can develop within 2 years, and this is the reason why I tell you that the restorations will fall off in 6 months, 9 months, in 1 year, and then you will develop a very bad reputation if you have really not modified the caries risk factors before you do surgical treatment. The patients who fail to attend their immediate follow-up appointments are more likely to experience relapse because then they are going into dental neglect and they will only come back to you when there is a problem, when the restoration has fallen off or when there is a swelling and things like that. So you must be aware of these factors to give the patient a prognosis to the treatment that you have done, because most of the patients will ask you, doc, what is the guarantee that the restoration will last in the child's mouth? So when you have a parent like that, you have to talk about all these to the parent. Recall and follow up. Children with severe early childhood caries must be reviewed to detect any changes in the restoration that you have placed and in the development of any white spot lesions. Okay, so you need to do active surveillance, and how often you should do active surveillance really depends on the caries risk assessment. So a child who is having high caries risk assessment, he has to be called between every 3 to 6 months. And child who is on um, moderate caries risk, he has to be called every 6 to 12 months. And the child who is on low caries risk, he can be called once in 12 months anytime. Okay, so your recall visit is based on this. We have learned this in your lecture on restorative pediatric dentistry, where we have talked about uh, caries management by risk assessment. Okay, so this is also covered there for just for your information here. So the barriers in management of caries. If we are doing medical management and surgical management, then why is early childhood caries still there as a disease, as a condition in children? So there are certain factors which makes our job difficult. Okay, so let's look at those factors. The first one is the patient factor. Okay, so lack of awareness of the possible problems associated with severe early childhood caries, as they are thought of as primary teeth. So you will see so many children in the supermarket. They have grossly fractured anterior primary teeth, and they're still happily munching on ketogenic diet. Okay, the reason is that the parents are unaware of early childhood caries, and they still think the notion is there that these milk teeth are temporary and they will fall off, so it's okay if you don't take care of them. Then we have healthcare professional factors. Okay, here we have problem of limited human resources, especially dental nurses who are multitasking. So if you look at school dental health program, uh, we have these nurses who are frantically trying to give temporization to open cavitated lesion in school children, right? And there is uh, scarcity of trained dental nurses to carry it out, at least for the government side. But in general, there is a limited human resources from healthcare professionals. Then the difficulty in management of very young children is also uh, a factor where the general dental practitioners do not like to treat very young children because they take up so much of their clinical time, and they do not really want to give in so much time for doing the behavior management of the child first and then going for the treatment and things like that, because these non-pain kind of things. So there is another problem in which is a barrier to the management of early childhood caries. Then we have limited knowledge among the non-dental healthcare providers. So of course, uh, what is early childhood caries? How does it happen? The effect of bottle feeding at night, things like that. But slowly, everybody is getting aware. But for now, we can safely say there is a limited knowledge among non-dental healthcare providers also. The health services factors, the lack of linkage between services and providers. So this is really a public health problem. Okay, and but here in Malaysia they're doing quite a good job, but again we have a problem of health services, like not enough specialist pediatricians, pediatric dentists uh, in the general hospitals to look after the children with special healthcare needs. Maybe we do not have enough general hospitals in the first place, or we need to have more clinics with specialist pediatric dentists. So in general, there is a mismatch between the services and the service providers. Mutant Streptococcus count. So this is try to avoid vertical and horizontal transmission of the carcinogenic bacteria. Then minimize saliva sharing activities, and we have to implement oral hygiene measures, and we have to start toothbrushing with the right amount of fluoridated toothpaste for the child's age. Then application of fluoride varnish and establishment of dental home within 6 months of the eruption of first tooth. Lastly, we have to avoid high frequency of liquids or solids which contain sugar, right? In particular, sugar containing beverages in baby bottles. For example, all those fruit juices, Pepsis, colas. Okay, we have to avoid that, or we have to no spill training cups should be avoided, because again this the child will try to keep the liquid in the mouth for a longer time. Infants should not be put to sleep with the bottle filled with milk or other liquid sugars, and on-demand breastfeeding should be avoided after first primary tooth begins to erupt and other dietary carbohydrates are introduced for the child. So we really have to take care on that also. The breast milk also has the capacity to cause early childhood caries, so it's not safe totally. But yes, the research have found on-demand feeding is can cause early childhood caries. So sometimes the child needs the closeness to the mother and they want to breastfeed for the purpose, and then they will have pooling of the milk in the mouth because child is really not drinking the milk. So we will have this problem. And lastly, the infant should be weaned from bottle between 12 to 18 months of age. This is very important, and this is a very frequent question that we get asked is if the child is bottle feeding, by what age should we wean off the child from the bottle? Okay, so the right age is before 1.5 years of age. Best would be 1 year. Okay, so if the child is breastfed for some reason, started the bottle feeding for some reason after birth, okay, by 12 years of 12 months of age, we need to stop the bottle feeding to the children. Okay. To end my session, the Oral Health Division of KKM has these clinical practice guidelines, which is available on the website, and on management of severe early childhood caries. This document is also available on the e-portal under the Pediatric Dentistry General Notice Board. So you can go there and you can also download and read this important clinical practice guidelines from the Oral Health Division of KKM. So with this, I end my presentation, and I will follow up the topic on the Google Classroom, and we will try to solve some quizzes on that. All right. So that is it from me. Have a good day. Bye bye.